welcome everyone. This is our 15th meeting, and we're working really hard to have these hybrid. So really grateful to ERG for helping us with the logistics, to folks in person and as well to folks online. I know sometimes it's hard to get really far from where you live. So now we will do roll call. Give me 1 second. Let me make sure I'm looking at the right. First page has the people. Okay, great. So, did you provide the logistics, Kessel?
Not yet. I can do that.
Great. So I'll pass it to Kessel from ERG, who's going to go through some of the logistics of a hybrid meeting.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. My name is Kessel, and I'm with ERG, a contractor supporting this meeting. You can't see me, but you can hear me. I will first start by providing meeting logistics for our Zoom attendees. This presentation is available with virtual interpreters in Spanish, Portuguese, Vietnamese, Haitian Creole, Cape Verdean Creole, and Mandarin. In-person interpretation is available in Spanish. I'm now going to ask our interpreters to switch to the English channel briefly, wave a little bit, and say the phrase, "To participate in," insert your language here. Please click the interpretation icon and select insert your language here. So first, I will ask our Spanish interpreter to do this.
Buenas noches a todos. Para participar en español, puede hacer clic en el icono de interpretación y seleccionar español. Gracias.
Thank you. Mandarin.
大家好，我是今天晚上的普通话翻译。大家如果想要以普通话参加会议的话，请点击屏幕下方的口语图标，并选择中文语言参会。谢谢大家。
Thank you. Vietnamese. To our Vietnamese interpreter, could you quickly switch into the English room and say the phrase, if you would like to participate in Vietnamese, please select the interpretation icon and select Vietnamese.
Để vào kênh bản tiếng Việt, hãy nhấp vào biểu tượng Interpretation và chọn tiếng Việt. Xin cảm ơn.
Wonderful, thank you. Portuguese.
Se você gostaria de participar em português, por favor, clique no ícone de interpretação e selecione o idioma português.
Wonderful. Cape Verdean Creole.
Alô, boa noite. Se você gostava de participar na reunião que utiliza cabo-verdiano, você pode clicar naquele ícone que está na interpretação, e seleciona Cape Verdean Creole, que é cabo-verdiano. Obrigada. Thank you.
Thank you. And Haitian Creole.
Bonsoir tout le monde. Si toutefois il y a mon tarme participer en créole haïtien, t'as pris cliquer dans la channel interprétation et puis sélectionner créole haïtien et puis pour capable participer en créole. Merci à pile.
Thank you. All right, now, as we've said in several languages so far, Zoom attendees should use the interpretation channel indicated by the globe icon in their Zoom control panel to select their preferred language. English speakers should select English so they can hear any translated comments. Closed captioning is available again on your Zoom control panel by clicking the CC icon. It is auto-generated in English for this meeting. If you are a virtual attendee and would like to use the telephone audio for this meeting, please click on the small arrow next to the microphone icon, select Switch to Phone Audio, and follow the directions provided. Virtual attendees can send an email to meetings@erg.com with any technical questions related to meeting logistics. Or if you've, let's say, trouble hearing something, you can put something in the Q&A box and I will troubleshoot with you. If you would like a translated version of the presentation slides, please go to the Environmental Justice Council website, which, oh, yep, Hannah has linked it in the chat. You'll find a translated set of presentation slides there. Also, please note that this meeting is being recorded and will be later available for viewing through a link that will be posted on the Environmental Justice Council website at the same link. If you have any questions, virtual attendees can submit them to the Q&A box. If you would like to make a comment during the time for public comments or questions, please raise your hand using the raise hand icon in your Zoom control panel, and I will unmute you. Or I will give you the ability to unmute yourself. If you were commenting in another language, please speak into your language channel and your interpreter will translate the comments into English. Or if you would not like to make verbal comments, you can type something into the Q&A box and I will read it aloud. In-person attendees who are asking questions, please make sure to speak into the microphone so virtual attendees can hear you. Finally, for all speakers, please speak slowly to accommodate the interpreters. Please use simple language and minimize the use of acronyms. I would also like to remind the council members to only use the chat function for meeting logistics and for no other communication in accordance with open meeting law. We are also asking all council members to leave their cameras on for the whole meeting. All right, now I'll turn it back over to Maria Belen-Power to go over the agenda and roll call.
Thank you, Kessel. And I do want to thank also the United Congregational Church of Holyoke, which is where we are at right now. For the folks that are in person, it is because of the folks on the ground in different communities that we are able to have these meetings hybrid and to go to different cities and towns in the Commonwealth. So thank you very much for hosting us, and to the council also for making the trip and for trying to figure out this sort of new world of hybrid meetings, interpretation. We have a little bit of snacks and drinks and water, and we're trying to figure out the logistics for making sure folks don't have to spend money on transportation to get to meetings, as well as childcare, although both of those are a bit more complicated when dealing with procurement and state processes, but we're still trying to figure those two out. And so now I will go through the agenda, and is the next slide, does it have the agenda? Great. So we're going to do roll call. We'll do questions and comments from the public. So we have started implementing a comment and question period at the beginning of the meeting as well as at the end of the meeting, so folks don't have to wait an hour and a half or 2 hours to speak or to ask their question. We will then have a response to questions if appropriate, or if there's sort of urgent matters, I guess. Then we will invite DOER, our colleagues from the Department of Energy Resources, who are here to talk about hydrogen and sort of where the state is in thinking about it and exploring it. Then we will allow for another period of question and comments from the public, and again, response or answers as appropriate, and then we will adjourn. So now I will go to roll call. Kalila Burnett.
Hello,
Hi.
I'm here.
Madeline Fraser Cook.
Hello, I'm here.
Melissa Harding Peretti.
Good evening. I'm here.
Thank you. Cheryl Holly.
I'm here.
Caroline Hahn.
I'm here.
Namrita Kapoor. I think she was not able to make it, right?
Yeah.
William L.
Here.
Marcos Luna.
Here.
Peter Matthew. Not able to join as well.
Oh, it looks
He
like
said
he is
yes.
just joining. All right, Peter, if you can unmute yourself.
Just, we're just doing a roll call, so all you have to say is here.
Hi, sir. Sounds good. Thanks.
Great. Thank you, Peter. Maria Belen, I'm here. Sophia Owen,
Here.
Jen Salinetti, I'm here. Patricia Spence,
Present.
Ari Zorn,
Go Celtics.
and Miles Gresham.
Here.
Great. Thanks, everyone, for joining and for being here. We will now open it up for public comment or public speaking, both virtual and in person. So if folks could raise their hand virtually, or if folks in person want to speak or ask questions, please feel free to do so. And Kessel, I think you're going to go through the logistics of that right now, right?
Yes, really quickly, did you do the minute approval?
I did not. Thanks, Kessel. So we will go through approval of the minutes. And so if I can get a motion to approve the minutes. So maybe Jen moved. Kalila, do you want a second?
Second.
All in favor, say aye. Or yes,
Aye.
raise your hand.
Aye.
Hi.
Aye. Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions?
I abstain. I wasn't there.
Marcos
I-
abstained.
And this is Caroline Hahn. I also abstain. I wasn't there as well.
Great, thank you.
I
And
wonder if I have to abstain as well.
say that again, Melissa, is that you?
Did I miss that meeting? I think I was there. I have to look at the minutes. My apologies.
I think
I
you were
was there. Okay. All right. I think I made it. I was like, maybe. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, great. So now we will go to public comment.
Yes, thank you. All right, so a reminder for anyone online, if you would like to put something into the Q&A box, I will read it aloud, or you can raise your virtual hand and I will give you the ability to unmute yourself. And if you are in person and would like to make comments, you can come up to the microphone. And we would appreciate it if people could limit their comments to 2 minutes to allow time for others to speak. All right, I see David Dow. I'm going to give you the ability to unmute yourself. All right, you should be able to unmute.
Hear me?
Yes.
2 weeks ago, I participated in the EPA National Environmental Justice Council meeting. And one of the presentations that was given by the Environmental Justice Council was on energy justice and climate change. And they had not only speakers from the Environmental Justice Committee giving an overview, but they also had people from environmental justice populations related to things that happened to them at the grassroots. And I just wanted to recommend that as a possible presentation option that the Massachusetts Environmental Justice Council and their state supporters might consider. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Is there anyone else online, Kessel?
I don't see anyone else. Let me check the Q&A box. All right, and we have no open comments unless, oh,
Great, we'll go to in-person folks.
Yes. Good evening.
Good evening.
My glasses.
Thanks for coming.
You're welcome. Thank you for being here. Nan Kobinski, Westfield, Massachusetts, former city councilor and other positions will take up more of my time if I get into that. I just wanted to bring up some things that I think I had mentioned this at one of your other meetings, but when I was participating in the room was, when was EJ coming on? If this falls under what your purview is or what you intend to do here, I guess you're going to be covering whatever has to do with the EJ population. So this happened in our city. The census determines which areas of your community get designated as EJ populations. So I want to know who's responsible, or is there a way to red flag? I think I don't know if there was an answer given to this at another meeting that I couldn't attend, virtually or in person. Yes.
I'm so sorry. It seems like the interpreters are having a little bit of a issue just probably on our end. Could you hold on a second? All right, try speaking again.
All right, thank you. I should talk slower, I suppose, but then I'm afraid I'd use up my 2 minutes. But anyway, that one.
Over, it's fine.
All right, well, you want me to start in the beginning? So this was about EJ populations that for some reason, whether the census determines that they are no longer considered by the state as an EJ population, how do they get alerted? I mean, in some communities, I know, especially particularly in the eastern part of the state, there's lots of grassroots organizations that are keeping tabs on this. But there's many communities here west of Worcester, probably, that don't really have anybody representing them to let them know that, one, they're even a EJ population, and then what happens if they now are not designated EJ population. We know that they can petition the state if there's 10 people that sign up to be reconsidered, but I don't know who's supposed to be responsible for taking care of that. So I think that would be something that I would like to see or established, that there is a red flag or something that goes up when somebody or a population that was once EJ now is no longer, so that they know how or what to do about it. Other things too, and I know this is I appreciate everything that you're trying to do here, because it's been a long haul for getting EJ to even be recognized across the state and then to become law. And in some communities, even at the local level, city and town governments don't even understand yet what their responsibility are and if they have one. I know in my community, the law department told them, don't worry about it, it's not you. The law is for the state agencies, not the local community. But to me, they're the ones that know their populations best. So they should somehow be invited to be participants in this, even if it's just to be able to help build those lists. We know when there's already been some permitting done in our city that those people that are the applicants are supposed to do outreach to EJs, and they get a list. And I looked at those lists, a lot of the names on those lists of agencies or grassroots organizations that would help them are in the eastern part of the state. There aren't very many that are in the western part of the state, and some of them don't even care really what's going on in their neighborhood that needs to be contacted. So I think this is a tremendous well, I've lost my mind here. This is a tremendous project to get this to happen and to connect and finally make people realize what EJ is and it's not just EJ populations, but the people that govern those people at the local and state level. So I'd like to see local and state government officials, elected officials, be educated about what this is and what their responsibility and how they can help. They don't want to be responsible for it, but maybe they should help assist this EJ Council and the state agencies in working with their EJ population. They should know the EJ populations in their own community best. And I'd like to see that happen. I know when I was on the city council that we were forced, we were told we had to go get educated about what open meeting law was, especially when it changed. We had to go sit and listen. A state presentation was given I wonder if something like that could be done for this particular law and what's happening with you guys in the EJ Council, so that the people who sit on city council that are elected to represent the people in their ward know how they can help those people and that they should be helping the EJ populations if something is relevant that is occurring, whether it's a new development or whatever, to do the outreach. Because I think we could do a better job of the outreach. And I don't want to put it all on the EJ Council or agencies at the state level, because I think we at the local level should be helping you guys too. Thank you.
Thank you so
Thank
much.
you so much.
All right.
Yeah, I mean, the question around whose sort of responsibility it is to let communities know when they have been de-designated. I don't think that's clear. I wouldn't be able to sort of say, this person or group is responsible, or is it the municipality or the state? But it's definitely a good point to raise when populations, change, and when they are designated EJ, and perhaps later on they're de-designated. So thank you so much. And we will, at least we'll take it back and think about how we can do that along with the education piece that you mentioned. Thank you. We meet every 2 months, so you can come every 2 months. Do I have another comment? Yeah.
Hi, thank you for making the trip all the way down to Western Mass. Nathan Chung, Holyoke Ward 5 resident, former volunteer for the planning board, current municipal employee for another city. Just one detail. I know, Mark, I know publicizing these types of events are very difficult and getting people to come. One issue I found was that I'm on the EJC official website on mass.gov, and I don't think the agenda is descriptive enough to show what you're covering. So I think that's one possible issue for one of the reasons why you don't have that many people attending, because people don't know what it's about. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you. That's a really good point. We usually have sort of the same structure and format to every meeting. So some of that is repetitive, I guess, or clear every 2 months. But the issue that we'll be discussing was not on the agenda. So that's a good point. Thank you so much. We'll try to make sure that goes out with the initial invitation.
Is this thing working? Hi, I'm Rick Purcell. I'm Richard Purcell. I live here in Holyoke. Welcome to Holyoke, the paper city. Environmental justice. We're an environmental justice community here in Holyoke. And a lot of times I say, if it isn't good enough for Long Meadow, it's not good enough for Holyoke. I participated and helped closing the Mount Top coal plant that we had here. That was, we're a poor community, and we had a coal plant that was helping kids have asthma. We have a very high asthma rate here in Holyoke. And as an environmental justice community, I'd appreciate the Environmental Justice Council to help us get rid of our asthma rates. We have a lot of clean energy here in Holyoke. We have a hydroelectric dam, and we have a lot of solar fields. And the Governor Baker's last thing was everything's going to be green by 2050. In my opinion, 2050 is too far away. We need we're at a lot of times in Holyoke, we're at 100% carbon neutral, but then we drop down for maybe seasonal during winter or in summer when the air conditionings are really going. Well, and I pressed the Holyoke Gas and Electric manager to figure out how can we get to become carbon neutral permanently, because our solar fields have batteries, so we're storing some of that energy. And we are, like I said, we're 100% carbon neutral all the time. But how do you help us have we're a municipality, electric company too. So it's not like Eversource or Columbia, and thank God they're gone. And we have a gas moratorium right now in Holyoke. And we didn't have the gas moratorium until we got in bed with Columbia Gas, because Columbia Gas wanted to get rid of the gas moratorium in East Hampton and Northampton. And we were the conduit. We were going to open up the gate so they can get more gas there. Gas is a pollutant. It's not clean energy. Clean energy is not gas, no matter how much the gas companies tell you that gas is clean, it's not clean. And the big issue in Western Massachusetts now is the pipeline that Eversource is trying to put in Springfield, the pipeline expansion. I went to they gave a tour with the politicians from the state level of the transfer station in Springfield by the casino. And they got off the bus and Eversource was giving them their grand tour. And I asked a simple question, just a simple question to the Eversource employees. How does this get us to carbon neutral? They didn't answer it. And my second question was, who's paying for it? The ratepayers are paying for it. In environmental justice communities, we can't afford that. That's why we're in environmental justice communities, because we get dumped on with all this stuff nobody else. Like I said, if it's not good enough for Long Meadow, it's not good enough for Holyoke. But we're the ones that they dump on the most throughout the state. I'm not just, I like Holyoke, so I live in Holyoke, so that's why I try to protect Holyoke. But I want to know what the Environmental Justice Council can do to help us to get our municipality to become 100% carbon neutral and set the example for the rest of the state of how it's done. And then you can ecotourism and a lot of other jobs can happen when you become 100% carbon neutral. And like I said, in this state right now, at times, the city is 100% carbon neutral. Thank you for your time. And thank you for coming to Holyoke.
Thank you. I mean, I don't think I have specific answers, but they're all very good points and themes around asthma and public health and our statewide climate goals, as well as becoming, reducing our emissions and meeting our climate goals, I guess. So thank you. Is there anyone else online, Kessel?
Yes, we have one comment from Kristen Mello. Kristen says, could the council please share any insights they might have into energy storage proposals and the potential effects, fires for one, on already burdened EJ neighborhoods? How do we balance the burdens and benefits of clean energy? What about chemical battery storage? Streamfield has been proposed to be built above the aquifer in Westfield, when that power would be stored for Eversource customers, none of whom reside in Westfield. So our drinking water would carry all the risk, but others would get the power. Thank you for your insight.
Thank you.
And there are no more comments as of now.
Great. Thank you. Speaking about energy, not that I'll make you answer the question about energy and battery storage, but I would like to invite up our colleagues from DOER. David, if you want to introduce your team, and I don't know if Deputy Commissioner Joanna Troy is online. I believe she was going to join us. So Joanna, if you are online, I don't know if you'd like to say just a couple words from DOER's.
I'm going to promote Jana to a panelist, so they'll be rejoining momentarily.
So DOER is Department of Energy Resources.
Sorry, I got switched to a panelist, so hopefully you'll be able to hear me. Thank you so much for having us today. Joanna Troy, I'm the Deputy Commissioner at the Department of Energy Resources. And I'm really excited that Dave could be there today to talk about our work on hydrogen. Really appreciated the public comment. We do have a lot of ongoing policy things that I'm hoping we can continue collaborating with the EJ Council on, including energy storage and clean energy goals. So very excited to be engaged today, and very excited that Dave will be able to walk through this, and hopefully we'll be able to answer some of the questions that you may have. Thank you.
Thank you. And I'll pass it to David.
Thank you. My name's Dave Lutz, as Maria Boleyn said, and I'm a renewable energy coordinator at the Department of Energy Resources. I work primarily on alternative fuels, which is how I ended up with hydrogen. I'm joined today by Allison Magoon, who works for our Mass Clean Energy Center. She's part of our hydrogen roadmap team. Other members of the team are Chevy Brown and Sarah Cullinan, who I believe are online. I'm not positive about that, but today I'm just going to run through the work we're doing on hydrogen, which is a small part, but potentially a very important part of how we're going to reach our clean energy goals. I've got a few slides. I've got them here. I'm also going to ask to move forward on the screen as I get to each one. My agenda tonight is to introduce myself, as I just did, and my team, as well as discuss some of the objectives we're trying to get to tonight. I want to give a background on what hydrogen is. I understand that the Environmental Justice Council is of mixed backgrounds and bring a lot of expertise, but may need a primer. Some of us may need a primer on this. I need a primer about every other meeting I go to. And then where hydrogen fits into our 2050 goals for climate carbon neutrality, which was just mentioned. The future of hydrogen in Massachusetts, our work on developing what we're calling a hydrogen roadmap, which is essentially a strategy on how we would deploy hydrogen technologies and uses in the state. The role of the stakeholders, including folks that are here, folks that are interested in the issue, people who will be impacted both positively and negatively by hydrogen uses. The issue has come up and it's been debated in many areas, and it continues to be debated on what the definition of what clean hydrogen is. And then some of the recommendations we would like to get from the Environmental Justice Council. This will be our first attempt to lay some ideas in front of you and then get your thoughts on how those could be integrated into what we do with hydrogen. And then some next steps. Next slide, please. Our objectives tonight is introduce the concepts behind hydrogen and decarbonization. Oh, thank you. Provide background on the hydrogen roadmap, and then solicit your input. Next slide. This is going to be a little bit of hydrogen 101. Many people think of hydrogen, if you remember chemistry from high school, it's the first box on the upper left-hand corner of your periodic table. It's the H. It is an energy carrier. The bonds that it uses to bind to other atoms, when they're broken, they release energy, and that is a useful output. Hydrogen has a very high energy content and has the potential to emit no carbon emissions when deployed properly, which makes hydrogen attractive as a clean energy solution, especially in those areas that are hard to electrify. Many folks know that the state is primarily focused on our decarbonization through electrification, making our grid based on renewables and other carbon-free generation sources, but and that will be then deployed into heating, transportation, obviously electricity. Hydrogen can be used as a fuel. It can be used to store energy, and it can be used as a feedstock for other potentially hybrid energy-rich fuels. The modes of production, transportation, and storage and use of hydrogen will impact its relative carbon neutrality. Next slide, please. Just some examples of where hydrogen is used. Currently, it's actually a deployed technology for carbon neutral transportation in many cases. UPS and FedEx both have hydrogen fleets, which are powered by hydrogen fuel cells. There's also other kinds of transportation that use hydrogen, and in many locations, they're beginning to use hydrogen fuel cells for stationary generation of electricity and heat. This is an example in the ports in Hawaii. There are actually a number of facilities in Massachusetts that have high fuel cells that they use now for electricity. many of the Home Depots in Massachusetts have fuel cells, for instance. Next slide. This is a slide which is going to be difficult to see, but this is our it's the graph of how we will achieve carbon neutrality in 2050. The big yellow piece in the middle, which grows bigger and takes up the bulk of the use by 2050, is electrification. The two slivers or the two slices at the bottom are essentially fossil fuel uses, which are declining over the decades. If you were able to look very closely, and this is online, so you can look, there's a little green sliver that starts somewhere around 2035 and grows to be slightly bigger in 2050, and that's the hydrogen sliver. That's what we're working on. As I said earlier, it's a small part of our solution, but it's a part that needs to be sort of managed so that when it's needed, we're able to get it deployed and used appropriately. Next slide, please. This is just some ideas or some thoughts that as we work on the hydrogen roadmap on how we will use hydrogen. It'll be targeted, aligning with our climate objectives, and the sectors that we're focused on are what we call hard to decarbonize or hard to electrify. They include things like heavy duty transportation, that's 18-wheelers, that's freight trains, that's marine vessels, both small and large, where the use of batteries is difficult due to either the way they're used or the length of time between their ability to charge and the amount of time they would have to be offline while they're charging. There are also some high energy use industrial sectors where electrification is basically cost prohibitive. Ceramics manufacturing, glass manufacturing, cement manufacturing, all of which require a significant amount of high heat in their processes, and that just does not work with an electrification approach. There are some other sectors too, building backup storage, hospitals, other public safety emergency facilities that need to have reliable backup battery sources if the electric grid goes down. Fuel cells, hydrogen fuel cells, or combined heat and power facilities using hydrogen can be that part of that solution. Next slide, please. So about 2 years ago, we began working with 6 other states in the Northeast region on a proposal for the Department of Energy for what was called the Hydrogen Hub process. 5 of the New England states and New York and New Jersey spent a significant amount of time working on a proposal for the Department of Energy. We were unsuccessful in getting that, but during that process, we realized that we needed to begin coordinating our strategies on how we were going to implement hydrogen technologies and uses both in Massachusetts and regionally, especially in the Northeast where the states are so close together. Transportation issues are, we need to coordinate with the other states, so we're working with other states on this. But so electrification remains our primary decarbonization strategy, and the hydrogen use will be focused on some very narrow sectors. I've said that a couple times, but I want to keep re-emphasizing that. We will recommend, we're hoping to recommend through this roadmap specific actions we can take, what kind of funding for state agencies, whether and how we would support private sector demonstration projects, modifying existing policies around the uses of fuel and storage, things like that. We want to make sure that as we roll this out, that we're providing appropriate education to both stakeholders, but also impacted communities. There are positive and negative impacts from using hydrogen, and we want to make sure that communities are aware of that as we do this. the use cases for hydrogen that support decarbonization. We want to make sure they benefit both the economy and the communities that will be located in them or near them. And we also want to ensure that the benefits from clean hydrogen are distributed equitably and that Commonwealth EJ principles are maintained. We want to provide direction for things like workforce training, safety, equity, environmental, and community engagement. Next slide, please. This is just a graphic on how we're doing this roadmap development. The big green box in the middle is my office and the Mass CEC. We're sort of responsible for developing this. We're seeking input from a variety of sources. We've put together an a hydrogen advisory group. I'm actually one of your members. Caroline Hahn serves on our hydrogen advisory group very capably, and we're very happy to have her. We're appearing before you today to seek your input. At the suggestion of Undersecretary Power, we'll be meeting with the Justice 40 working group. We continue to have communications with the other states on how they're doing and what they're doing and how we can coordinate better with that. And then when we're close to being finished, we'll be putting this out for public comment where people in the real world get an opportunity to read it and provide comment on that. And then obviously we feed it up through the food chain to our bosses at the Executive Office of Energy and Environmental Affairs, and then on to the Governor's Office for their sign off. We're hoping that this process will result in a final roadmap that will be available sometime in August, late August, early September. That's a bit of a delay from our original timeline, but this is a lot more difficult than I thought, putting this thing together. Next slide, please. One of the issues we've wrestled with throughout this process is the definition of what clean hydrogen is. And folks who are familiar with this have heard many different things about the relative cleanliness of hydrogen in terms of its carbon impact or its greenhouse gas impact. There's something called green hydrogen, which is produced using renewable electricity only. That is completely carbon-free. But there are other ways you can get to or close to a carbon-free hydrogen through, you can use, one of the primary ways that hydrogen's made now is by essentially cracking natural gas to pull the hydrogen off. It's called steam methane reforming. Right now, that is largely done without any controls on the carbon. The Department of Energy has used a definition that includes steam methane reporting, but requires carbon capture and sets what they call a carbon dioxide equivalency standard, which means you have to capture most, if not all, your carbon when you do that. There are other ways you can produce hydrogen that is considered to be from carbon-free sources, nuclear energy. Connecticut has a very active nuclear power plant that they are focused on for a potential source of clean hydrogen. There's also, you can use anaerobic digester gas, which is considered, it's not a fossil fuel, biomass gases, things that are not fossil fuel based. They all have issues, but you'd have to put carbon capture when you're using things like that. So those are some of the things we're having to look at. In Massachusetts, we want to make sure that folks, this is something that I want to make sure the council understands. This is not what we would call a legal definition of hydrogen. It's a sort of a policy definition. It's how we would use our resources to support the growth of certain kinds of hydrogen. So that's an important factor as we consider this. As I mentioned, the Department of Energy uses a definition that's based on carbon equivalency. It includes green hydrogen and the nuclear-based hydrogen, but it also includes hydrogen that's produced using natural gas. There is a federal debate, or there's a federal rulemaking going on relative to a hydrogen production tax credit. Whatever comes out of that will influence how we end up, because the production, the companies that are in the business of producing hydrogen will want to avail themselves of that federal tax credit. So whatever they end up with will at least influence how we ultimately define hydrogen. And then just to let you know that it's a free-ranging debate. There are other jurisdictions that have either defined hydrogen or are looking at different ways to do this. That the European Union essentially has what I referenced as the green hydrogen standard. Connecticut standard is hydrogen produced from non-GHG emitting sources that would allow them then to use their nuclear power as well as renewable energy. New York standard is the green hydrogen standard. It's the way you produce that is through a process called electrolyzing it. You run it through you basically run water through a system and you split the water and you end up with oxygen and hydrogen. So there's some water use impacts there, but it is carbon neutral. Washington State standard allows for the use of things like biomass and anaerobic digester gas. Next slide, please. So as we look to engage on the issue with the communities, these are some of the things we want to make sure that we would like you to consider and address. We can address them tonight. We will also continue to listen to the Environmental Justice Council and folks from environmental justice communities. Some of the starting points for the discussion on this, how do we engage in the community? How do we do community outreach, public outreach on this, education and involvement? How do we ensure that community benefits are attached to whatever siting of facilities might occur? And we're also trying to make sure we weigh positive benefits against negative benefits. Communities that are impacted by heavy vehicle usage, lots of diesel emissions, conversions of fleets to hydrogen would significantly reduce those kinds of emissions. But there are other impacts related to, the storage of the fuel and things like that. The water impacts, as I mentioned, electrolytic production of hydrogen uses a lot of water. And so therefore there will be localized impacts depending on how your water is distributed in your area. And we want to make sure those are taken into consideration before we start promoting production in different areas. There are safety issues around storage and transportation. The National Fire Prevention Association has a hydrogen standard, NFPA 2, which is rules that Massachusetts has adopted. It's how to appropriately site and manage storage of hydrogen. We want to make sure that local communities are aware of those standards and are educated on those standards. And then obviously training for local building officials and public safety officials on how that will roll out. And then as we consider what incentives the state could provide, how do we make sure that those incentives carry with them appropriate community benefits? We've had lots of discussion during the roadmap process about requiring community benefits plans from any developers that would ensure that local concerns are managed and there's an appropriate process for doing that, as well as benefits from the facility flow to the local community. And lastly, additions, revisions, and whatever other considerations you folks may have and will give to us. We're very interested in hearing those. Next steps, as I mentioned earlier, we're drafting the roadmap, including developing the full environmental justice and equity strategy and plan. We want to make sure we incorporate your comments and the Justice 40 Working Group comments into that work. will also our advisory group, I almost said my advisory group again. Our advisory group will be meeting on equity too, and I'm sure we'll hear some thoughtful things from them. Many of the folks on that group have experience working in communities, citing facilities that use hydrogen or similar things. And then post the roadmap publication, we want to make sure we have an appropriate plan in place to make sure that all the recommendations are implemented appropriately by the Commonwealth. So tracking and benchmarking of our progress is important no matter what we do once we publish the roadmap. With that, I stop and ask if anyone has any specific questions about the presentation, and then open it up to thoughts from the council.
Thank you, David. Yeah, okay. And I don't think we can see if folks have their hand raised, but we'll go with you, Khalil.
I guess just a clarification that the decision has already been made that clean hydrogen or green hydrogen is going to be one of the pathways that the state is investing in.
It's part of the pathways solution that we have for the 2050 plan. It is a lesser known pathway, which is one of the reasons that we're focusing on it, is that if it is going to be a part of that plan, there are things we need to do as a state to make sure it's done properly and safely and efficiently. So yes, the decision has been made. What I would say, and Joanna's about to say this too, the plan is currently written does not guarantee that 2050 end result is what happens, but go ahead.
Just to clarify, I think that the definition of hydrogen, clean hydrogen, is one of the topics that is under discussion in the roadmap, and Dave presented a number of options that have been discussed, and we would like the roadmap to contain that definition, but we are taking comment on that definition at this time. But I think what Dave is referring to is that we have identified hydrogen as one of the strategies in our roadmap.
In many ways, it's one of the most effective ways to get at the hard to electrify sectors. Maritime transport is not likely to be a battery driven sector, for instance. Heavy duty vehicles are like 18-wheelers, long haul 18-wheeler vehicles would have a difficult time under current technology standards using lithium ion batteries to meet their needs, and hydrogen offers an alternative. So it is now part of that planning process.
I see there's a few hands up, so I don't know if you saw who went first or not, but I can go down.
That's great. They do it. So yeah.
All right, let's go Marcos then. Oh, Cheryl, you unmuted. Why don't we go Cheryl first?
I just have a quick question about the impact on water supply. Is it only clean, drinkable water that can produce this hydrogen, or can you make use of the plethora of undrinkable water bodies we have, at least here in Central Mass?
It all does need to have some level of treatment before it's used, filtration or whatever. But there are examples of even salt water being used. So there are a lot of different sources for the water. That is one of the things we would be concerned about, is someone parking themselves next to the Quabbin Reservoir, for instance, and deciding they're going to make hydrogen there. That's not likely to happen, but those are the kinds of things we'd want to make sure we have an eye on, and we're making the decision-making process reflective of our concerns about that. So, wastewater treatment, discharge water is potentially usable depending on what standard it meets, things like that. So, yeah.
Thank you. We'll go to Marcos, then Sophia.
Great, thank you for the presentation. So I'm going to start with questions first, just a clarification. When you talk about these hard to electrify sectors or use cases, are you talking about, are you excluding, or are you talking about fuel cell uses or in that case, or are you talking about situations where you need combustion of hydrogen?
Most of the solutions on the what I would call the mobile side, the transportation side, are most likely to be fuel cells. Large maritime vessels, I don't think they have a solution yet. Airliners, airplanes, again, don't have a solution. Hydrogen is in the mix for consideration in both those cases. Marine vessels are looking at things like ammonia, which is a product that can be produced from hydrogen. They need something that's a little bit sort of more dense. A liquid fuel works better for maritime use at this point. So ammonia is one of the things that's being considered for maritime vessels. We are not likely to be the state that resolves that, but we obviously have ports in Massachusetts where we need to be considered, we need to consider what will be used by the vessels that are coming in to the Port of Boston and Bedford and areas like that. So that's part of what we're considering. But a lot of the transportation solutions are fuel cells. Things like backup emergency generation can be fuel cells, but it can also be combined heat and power, for instance. So it's a mix. If you were able to produce hydrogen for storage with using excess renewables, like during long sunny days in August, where you're producing more electricity than you're using, hydrogen can be produced using that, and it would be stored. And then there are considerations for whether that could be then combusted as part of an electricity generation plant. That is not necessarily a guaranteed solution, but it's part of the considerations we are undergoing right now.
So thank you. So can I just went where I was thinking actually in terms of thinking about the uses of it. So I know that the definition for clean hydrogen right now seems to be, or is focused on the generation side of it, and the generation in regard to CO2, or rather carbon impacts. But I think if I can speak from my own perspective, that a lot of environmental justice concerns are about the local impacts. So we're very concerned about the uses of that. And so combustion rises high because anytime you burn anything, we get nervous. So I want to know, what the criteria are for those special use cases that involve, the need or imply the need for hydrogen in some form, but also specifically when that means some use of the hydrogen that may result in a local impact, like some kind of emissions from combustion. So that's what I would be curious about, the clarification on those special use cases and when they involve things like combustion.
I'll tell you honestly up front that when hydrogen actually when you combust hydrogen, you actually have a higher NOx emission than you do combusting natural gas, for instance. So that's obviously concern, and where it would be combusted in the controls that are put on that, or things like that. So yeah, I agree with you that it is part of our consideration is where those kinds of potential combustion cases would occur. So
thank you.
Thank you. We will go to Sophia and then Caroline.
Thank you. And thank you for the presentation. So I also have a question and then some feedback. One thing that I'm wondering, so two questions. Just to start to dovetail off what Marcos was saying. I was curious, there were references to the proper deployment of hydrogen, and I was curious what that means. Just because, as has been noted, there can be so many different ways that it is used. And I guess the question, like, properly deployed based on what? Because there's like proper deployment from the industry perspective, but also like from the community perspective. And I would imagine that those things could differ. I was also just curious about, and I understand from a legal perspective that this would be a policy definition, but just curious about how this would interact with policy, like the other policies that are being and laws and regs that are being passed on the state level, but also on the local level where folks are thinking about hydrogen. And then the other just question that I had was, I know you mentioned the timeline and that are hoping to have the draft available in August, and was just curious about where that timeline came from or how that was developed. And then I have some comments, but I would rather hear the answers first because that might help direct my comments, if that's okay.
Sure. To address your first question, when I use the word deployment, I'm talking about specific sectors that the state would be supportive of. So it's a sector, it's not a geographic site deployment, it's a sector deployment. So heavy duty transportation, 18-wheelers, buses, trains, backup generation. That's what I meant by that when I used the word deployment. So it's the implementation in various sectors of how we would support or not support the implementation in those sectors. I'm going to have to go ask the last question. Is the timeline came out of us sitting down and working on what we had and what we knew we needed to do more further research on, and just developing a timeline to get a roadmap done. Our original publication date was the middle of July. We've had to push that by 4 to 6 weeks. But it really there's no regulatory or legal or statutory requirement that we have to have this done, but we want to get a strategy in place that we can, begin to educate folks on, get further comment on, and adjust as necessary. So the timeline was sort of our workload and our capacity to get it done, essentially. So, and I apologize, your middle question I've spaced on. And
I think the middle question was about balancing. And I mean, so I think the one thing that we'd really love to hear on is with this public comment is ultimately when we create the recommendations in the roadmap, there is going to be a number of considerations we take into account. You'll see that the advisory group covers a number of people. We're really focusing on that stakeholder engagement. Because yes, I think the ultimate outcome of having an industry that is sustainable, cost effective is important, but not at the disproportionate impact to communities. So all of the impacts are going to be part of our sort of matrix of trying to figure out. So any kind of help that this council or any kind of stakeholder can help us with what are the list of considerations so that we can try to balance them as best as we can. Meeting our climate goals is going to be a challenge. And I really appreciated how Dave sort of said that this is something that we recognize is not a very large policy in the sense that we still think electrification is going to be the majority of our decarbonization, but we recognize that this is something that's very potentially impactful. So having a strategy earlier rather than later and understanding all of the considerations at the beginning of the policy process, instead of letting industry lead and then creating maybe community impacts later in the process, we're trying to get ahead of it as much as possible now.
Thank you.
That's all helpful. Like there's sort of my process feedback and then like substantive feedback and concerns that I have about hydrogen. And from a process perspective, I guess I'm wondering why wait to start educating folks until you have the roadmap when these things are so technical and are going to need ongoing education, particularly in the communities that are going to be most impacted by it. This is feedback that I gave wearing my ACE hat to the advisory council for the grid modernization process. So I don't think, Joanna, I know you were there. I don't think this is news to you. Like with this transition, I think if we want to be serious about community engagement, we can't just be doing it when there is some sort of a public comment period, like to actually get feedback from folks. So that's one thing. And I guess just with that, the piece around timing, I understand wanting to do things quickly and have a plan in place, and intentionally engaging folks, as we've seen with the council meetings and with other processes, really does take time. On the substantive side of things, I have a lot of concerns around hydrogen. The combustion piece is one thing, but just generally, without, I guess, just given the inequities that we know exist and where things currently are cited and where the hotspots are for pollution and what that looks like in the Commonwealth, that we have to be very intentional about the definitions that we're using, the uses that we're allowing, and who's going to be benefited and burdened by it. And I guess just so two substantive pieces. I think from an EJ perspective, without some sort of a cumulative impacts assessment process or an acknowledgement of the cumulative impacts on where these projects are likely to be cited. If that's not there, that's a no-go. And then the other thing that I was going to say is just about the benefits piece. I think we have to be really careful when we are talking about benefits only in terms of community benefits agreements, because communities are not monolithic or homogenous. You know, you could have government saying they support something. You could have multiple communities within a community saying they don't. And so want to make sure that it's not, well, one, that it's not only economic benefits, but also that there is meaningful engagement of a variety of folks in the space. And I guess just the one other thing that I would say is, I know it's, again, that engagement takes a lot of time. And I know that the EJ office in particular is doing a great job of engaging with folks, and the Justice 40 working group is an important piece of that puzzle. But I think there are definitely other groups and coalitions that would love to be able to give feedback prior to the public comment period, if that's possible. Thanks.
Thank you. I mean, the roadmap is the beginning of the conclusion of the roadmap is the beginning of our launch of this. So I would say that we can't go out and start educating people until we know what we think about it. So I think we want to make sure we have a handle on both how we think it should be deployed and things like that. But also, I mean, that's why we're here. That's why we've engaged with other groups, is we want to make sure that we're providing the appropriate amount of education as we launch our efforts. We have not launched our efforts on hydrogen yet, was the way I would say it. So thank you.
So up next, Caroline, and then Lydia.
Great, thank you. And David, thank you for the presentation, and thank you for the work that you've been doing to lead the work on the roadmap. I know it's been incredibly challenging, as well as you've been taking a lot of input, and a lot of input that comes in isn't always consistent, I think, across the stakeholder group, which is great because it's a diverse set of inputs. I just wanted to reinforce what Sophia had brought up around education. Understanding, I understand this is a really heavily technical topic, and there are lots of questions that anyone can have, from the generation side all the way to end use and transport, and how that all fits together. And so I do think that in the roadmap, we will need to lay out enough time to be able to educate in advance. You don't necessarily have to know exactly how it's going to be used to even start laying out the groundwork of like, how is hydrogen produced? What are the impacts? So because I think what's going to be so important is going to be transparency. It's something that isn't really well understood in the general public and comes with, I think, a lot of, and we've talked about this before, but, negative connotations. And so I think it'll be so important to be very transparent about what hydrogen does and doesn't do, what it is, what it isn't, and do that well in advance of a cited project so that that groundwork is there and we can actually, and then, as stakeholder input is solicited, it will come from a place of maybe a common education rather than narrowly something that's kind of trying to cram in and spot answers to questions without seeing the entire picture of the entire life cycle. So maybe there's an opportunity to get input on education and what that educational plan might look like, kind of well in advance of really engaging in the stakeholder process on anything site specific.
Okay, thank you.
I see, Joanna, did you go off mute? Did you?
I was just going to say thank you. I think this is really helpful. I'll definitely follow up with the team and Dave on sort of, we don't want to rush things. So if there's an opportunity to do maybe like a webinar and then some meetings, like any kind of advice on how this education might best be implemented, I think we're very willing. And it's one thing I wanted to highlight is there was a lot of discussion when we started this project on sort of the audience and the length of the roadmap. There's a lot of materials that DOE has put out. We are aiming for something that is readable, that is, something more like 30, 40 pages, not 150 pages. That is actually one of the challenges and why we've been delayed is because this is so much material that making it something that is consumable has been more challenging than we anticipated. But that is one of our goals. And I think one of the things we'll really want to get input on when we do the public comment period as well, and with the community engagement is are we hitting that mark? And is the document actually explaining hydrogen well?
Thank you. We'll go with Lydia and then Sophia.
Yeah, I think I just want to echo what others have said about education up front. And, I'm one of those people who has no technical background. I can say that just in the brief presentation given tonight, there's a lot that I don't understand. So I just wanted to highlight some terms that, would be good to define, like you say hydrogen's an energy carrier, not an energy source. That seems like an important point. I have no idea what that means. I have no idea what it means, what feedstock means for other energy rich fuels. I don't know what a fuel cell is.
I can actually show you a slide on what a fuel cell is if you're interested. We had it sort of in.
Yeah, I am interested, but I think
came up.
I am interested, but I'm just trying to also give examples of the kinds of things that,
I think
need to be defined.
You're hitting exactly the balance that we're trying to figure out how to strike. It is a highly technical issue. When I started working on it 2 years ago, I had some idea what a fuel cell is, but I had no idea how you got energy out of hydrogen. So,
so I think that it does take time, but I think that most, I believe most people like myself can learn about highly technical things if they're explained, in a simpler language and some of those terms are defined.
Okay, thank you.
So, did you have a question?
Yeah, Cheryl has her hand up.
So I see Sophia and then Kalila had raised her hand. And then
Sure.
Is that okay?
Yeah.
With Jen and then Cheryl. Go ahead, Sophia.
Thanks. I knew I forgot something. The one other thing that has been front of mind is the piece around incentives. And the fact that, the Department of Energy does have the incentives as was noted. And I think well, a question or a concern that I have is about around the development of incentives is, like whether that will result in, even if we think hydrogen is only a small piece of the puzzle, the direction that a lot of industry seems to be going is thinking about hydrogen to be the replacement for natural gas. When, as was noted, we're in a place with natural gas where we're locking in infrastructure for the next 50 years. So are we going to be in a place 50 years from now where we're talking about the need to replace hydrogen? And if we're incentivizing it with money that could be going to do things that would be more beneficial for the most overburdened communities, and also from a planetary, like an environmental perspective, I think we should be very cautious about adding additional incentives, and understand that it's a balancing act, but that is a fear that I have. So thanks for letting me speak again.
Thank you. We will go to Kalila.
Yeah, I just want to echo the piece about the education process needing to be robust and really clear. Like, just even for example, tonight, it would have been good to see the PowerPoint presentation in advance, because it's very hard to like react to such a brand new subject in real time, especially when it's, the first like introduction of this for many of us, myself included. And I think that I would encourage you all to include I don't know, someone who's skilled in describing things in simple terms, adult education in terms of how you're rolling out the engagement process, because there's just so much jargon in clean energy that is really meaningless to most of us. And so if that doesn't happen in a good way, then the community, whatever discussions that happen, are not actually going to be truly meaningful, because people are not going to have the proper information to engage. And then I think my other piece is, I have a lot of overall concern, sort of about like the safety of this, and how do we share some of that information with people really, so they can make choices about, what actually ends up in their community. And then also, I guess, just if I'm understanding things correctly, like this potential technology, which has been developed by industry, and they're like, this is a good thing, I don't know, is going to help such a small scale of decarbonization, where we know that like electrification and other things are more sort of bang for the buck. And we haven't quite figured out how to do those things in a truly excellent way. Just why is it worth the time and energy to because there's only a limited capacity, right? Is it worth the time and energy to spend so much time on something that is not as meaningful of an impact? And to Sophia's point, a few decades from now, are we going to be talking about, transitioning away from it? So like, is this the best use of time and money? And then the other piece that was a concern was around water, which is an incredibly precious resource. And many parts of the state have been going through drought, and many parts of the state, people don't have access to clean drinking water. So just like, why, and again, continuing to spend time like investigating, exploring something that's a drain on such a limited resource that is so precious, that could be used in other ways to promote the health and well-being of communities.
Thank you.
Thank you, Kalila. I believe we said Cheryl and then Jen, is that right?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, so I just want to preface this by saying I'm not a scientist, and the more I listen, the more I realize I know very little about energy production. But the more I listen, the more I just become a little alarmed or worried. And Kalia just almost said what I was thinking very articulately. But I'm wondering about the dangers. I didn't see really anything on those slides about the dangers of producing hydrogen. And I'm wondering if you're planning this, do you already know where these production sites will be, and are they going to be in EJ neighborhoods? I mean, that's usually where dangerous things are produced. So I was wondering if you already have a plan on that. And yeah, and the destructive force of what you're doing.
So to address that specific question, we don't know. And I think what we're trying to make sure we do is we have rules in place so that when a proposal comes along for production, that there are opportunities and in fact requirements for the communities that are going to be impacted to be engaged in that process, similar to the entire approach that our environmental justice policy seems to be heading in. So all of these facilities would be private sector produced. We just want to make sure we have the right rules in place to make sure they're done properly. So, and I agree, we need to understand that the impacts and make sure that those are mitigated or not taken. So.
And definitely heard on the cumulative impact. So we'll definitely make sure we're referencing cumulative impacts in the roadmap, not just talking about hydrogen as a zero emission fuel at the point of combustion, but really talking about the whole thing. It's very challenging writing the state roadmap in this direction, trying to understand a lot of this hydrogen might be produced outside of the state. And so a lot of what we're talking about as well is transportation and storage, because there are, I mean, 4 of the hydrogen hubs were funded, and some of those hydrogen hubs were funded in areas that do plan on using natural gas to produce their hydrogen, and they would like to use that across the whole country. So really thinking about not only the impacts to the state, obviously prioritizing our own communities, but thinking also about the cumulative impacts to communities across the country as well.
And the dangerous aspect of producing hydrogen, I'm older than probably most of you, so I'm thinking H-bomb and the shelters when I was little.
Think more Hindenburg than H-bomb, I think, is the problem. The biggest safety concern about hydrogen is it is very flammable. It's same with natural gas. So there are a lot of strict safety rules and regulations. Again, the roadmap intention is we're hearing very much clearly right now is education. So we'll try to make sure that we include in the roadmap and in the outreach education on how those rules and regulations around safety will exist. It is highly combustible.
All right, thank you very much.
Thank you. And we'll go to Jen.
Thank you. Again, I can't emphasize enough about the educational component, and I appreciate hearing how much you are hearing this at this time. And so a couple clarifications around that. So within this roadmap, you would not be doing any education prior to the roadmap being released. Is that correct?
I think the idea is that our education planning would be part of the roadmap.
Part of it,
So,
okay.
like I said, we're seeing this as the publication is the start of our efforts rather
Right.
than the end of our efforts. So we want to make sure we have a plan in place before we start any work on hydrogen.
Wonderful, wonderful. A couple quick suggestions that came to mind around the educational component of it is a glossary of terms to start with, some great visuals to go with those words too, and perhaps some pre-recorded videos, so hydrogen basics could be really fun and informative. And that precursor component too, like before being in community spaces, I think would be really instrumental. And then there were 2 questions I had around from your presentation. The examples that you gave, you said Connecticut, New York, and Washington State that you named, they already have some form of implementation in place.
They either have a policy or a roadmap. Connecticut is developing a roadmap. New York's developing a roadmap, but New York published a grant opportunity where they define it as green hydrogen, essentially. Washington State actually has a policy on what they'll consider hydrogen.
Okay.
So we're all over the place in terms of where we're at.
Right.
And how we implement this stuff too.
Okay.
California has a vast number of programs. I left them out because I didn't have enough time or energy to do all the research, but California has a bunch of different hydrogen approaches, and it's all over the place in what they'll accept into their various programs. So
Okay, so implementation's already occurring in some
in
of
other
these states.
yes,
Okay,
exactly.
also great examples as part of the education, I would say. And then the other piece that you touched on was around a 6-state collaboration.
Sure.
Can you speak a little bit more to that?
Sure. It's actually 7. It was us and 6
7.
other states. It was
Okay.
all the New England states except for New Hampshire and New York and New Jersey. The Department of Energy put out a solicitation for what they called hydrogen hub proposals, where proposers were putting together a series of projects that would interlink production through end use. And they made a decision. We did not get that, but we spent a lot of time looking at all these various uses, and as part of that, realized we needed to get our act together on how we were going to look at it.
Were
So
you
that-
meaning Massachusetts or all
we-
7 states?
I think Massachusetts specifically, Connecticut was way ahead of us.
Yeah.
New York was slightly ahead of us, and the rest of the states are either right. Rhode Island and us are sort of at the same spot, and Vermont and Maine and I'm missing somebody. Oh, New
New
Jersey.
Jersey.
Yeah, they're all about this. They're all kind of in the same place.
So
There was a lot of money on the table.
Okay.
We wanted to see if we could take advantage of it.
Mhm.
During that process, we realized we needed to have a better strategy on
Okay.
how to deal with it.
So are there any directives, I guess, on the federal level to be seeking collaboration rather than competing for money?
They continue to put out different solicitations, some of which are related to hydrogen. That's the biggest collaborative one.
Mhm.
Most of the awards went to multi-state collaborations. So there was that effort on their part, but most of the rest of them are focused on particular kinds of technologies or uses. So it's more individual applications than it is a coordinated process.
Would you consider it a priority for Massachusetts to be looking at that on a more regional level?
We continue to talk to, I have a meeting next week with the folks from New York about where they're at and where we're at, for instance. We were on a phone call a couple of months ago with Connecticut and Rhode Island and New York on all this stuff. As I mentioned, we're a little bit different because all our states are kind of crammed together as opposed to the rest of the country. We need to coordinate because a lot of this stuff will involve interstate transport and interstate usage. Joanna mentioned that we won't necessarily be producing any of the hydrogen in state, but it'll be produced in states around us or in the Midwest or Middle Atlantic, where we want to make sure that we have coordination with them on policy.
Great. All right. Thank you.
Is there anyone else?
Real quick, sorry. Madeline Fraser Cook messaged me and said that she'll let the conversation continue, but she wants to register her concern about the water impacts. She just got back from a major metropolitan area in South America where water is already being rationed. And she's very concerned about this approach without more information.
Great. Thank you. I was just going to say, and the terminology issues come up quite a bit tonight. And just as an aside, at DOER in our internal file system, we have a running glossary for our own use because we don't even understand all the terms. So I fully understand the need to make sure people are grounded in what we're talking about. So.
And taking into consideration what the state literacy level is within that. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. I think we will close our own internal question and comment period, given the time. But thank you so much for coming and for the presentation, and thanks to the whole team also.
Thanks.
Yeah. And I also think we don't have time for another part of Q&A unless, well, let me hold on. So are there hands up, Kessel?
There are no hands up. There are some comments in the Q&A box.
Okay, maybe we can read them and then we'll move forward. Oh, and there's an in-person. Do you want to go first and then we'll read the, yeah. And then we'll read the comments from the chat or the questions.
And Nicola Chappelle, first and foremost, Holyoke native, mayor of East Hampton and the president of the Mass Municipal Mayor Association. Thank you so much for coming to Holyoke. The work of your council is so important and needed at a time when mayors across the state and we find out across the country all the time are facing the exact concerns that have been brought up here tonight. One of the biggest things that came up in my mind around this topic is the education. And I think it's not just hydrogen. We're looking at in East Hampton collaborating with some international organizations to do graphic facilitation in community workshops around hydrogen, solar, passive, that are hands-on, that use more of a universal design. I give this little speech in front of every council I can because it's so helpful, and I learned it when I was teaching the Holyoke Public Schools. But it's a great place, and I have to agree that you can't start soon enough. I understand the technical challenges of not knowing what clean hydrogen is and whatnot. That said, a lot of interest on the municipal side for a couple of reasons. In the one, the technology and the work FEMA is doing around using wastewater for hydrogen. They have a fascinating fire engine that is a combination of electric and hydrogen that allows a range up to about like 150 miles. The interest on my part for small towns is that we are in intermunicipal agreement with East Hampton, West Hampton, Southampton, sometimes the Fruit Bowl part of Holyoke, and to, in the middle of the winter, get a fire engine that could be electrified out there and it actually do its job and maintain the power in temperatures under 40 degrees. It's not doable. There is a lot of federal money that we could go after to get an electric fire engine. And even with a level 3 charger, we would not be able to service. We would not be able to service the area that we're under. And I think that there's a lot of potential there. I think there's also a lot of potential for I don't want to say RGGI, but also microtropolis clean energy solutions and around hydrogen because of the unknowns, the dangers, and looking at that as a more collaborative basis of maybe, East Hampton, we share a lot of water and land boundary with Holyoke. And if there is a space, I think of like, is there any ways to stabilize like former landfill? And so the cells and that capacity could be delivered in one centralized place. Then the and again, I really want to go back to in wastewater. So I was able to spend some time in the Middle East and in a lot of Middle Eastern countries, especially Israel, but also Jordan and Saudi Arabia. There are purple pipes. Pipes are full of wastewater that has been regenerated, cleaned, and whatnot. They're used to grow plants, seeds, also used to make beer and wine, and also the potential of hydrogen. I did not see, and I don't know of anybody who's doing that. I know FEMA is working with some private industry to look at the reuse of wastewater, which is just a tremendous, we just underuse it. We kind of have, we make us think about it, but we really need to use it, even in communities like Holyoke where there are 5 reservoirs. It's not enough. That water is going to go away fast. So I just mentioned that these comments about this particular slide deck, and I do see a small sliver of hydrogen-based heavy-duty vehicles as a transition. When we're a community that has the ability and to really do a climate action plan that's a deep dive. And we can't get to a full EV fleet in our small region without some hydrogen or a like they call it fringe clean energy, because the infrastructure, the older and the poorer a city is, the electrical infrastructure is not there, and it's tens of thousands of dollars. And it, no matter what anybody tells
Please
you,
wrap up your comments, please.
oh, sorry. It falls on the renters and the most poor in the country. Thank you. I'm sorry.
Thank you so much. Thank you for being here. Well, Kessel, if there are the questions in the Q&A box, if you could read them out, that would be great.
Yes. So these came throughout the presentation we saw, so some of them might have been for a specific slide, just for context. So the first one is from Kristen Mello. They said, I had no idea about your speaker. I swear to God. I was just glad to have the chance to ask you about it, because when I asked the Streamfield guys what's in the box, aka what could contaminate our water, they stopped talking to me. I'm a city councilor at large and the chair of the Natural Resources Committee. Next, we have Michael Sales, who said, to be addressed at an appropriate time in the meeting. Do you have any thoughts on how the offshore wind energy supply chain will benefit Holyoke? Next, we have David Dow, who said, the presentation by MADER on the H2 roadmap is a perfect example of an inadequate approach discussed by the EPA National Environmental Justice Advisory Council, or NEJAC, where state DER staff develops the plan and seeks HAP population comments on a draft plan. This presentation was too long and technical for grassroots entities or folks to understand and comment upon. How does DER plan to address this communication gap? Next, we have a comment from Kristen Mello, who said, and I might pronounce this incorrectly, Quabbin, yes, great, feeds residents of Eastern Mass. That was deeply insensitive to say out here to people with permanently PFAS contaminated drinking water, soil, and bodies. And then we have another comment from Kristen, who said, is he going to connect us to the Quabbin, or could be US to the Quabbin? And then we have a comment from David Dow, who said, as a retired marine scientist, the devil of the H2 roadmap is in the details, as well as the big picture and how we reach carbon neutrality by 2050, where EJ populations receive the benefits without more burdens, a focus of EPA, NEJAC. And then we have a comment from Kristen Mello, who said, and what's in, and this might have been related to a specific slide or comment, but they said, and what's in the box? What goes into the air when it lights on fire, and what ends up in the water? And then our last comment is by Stephen Buckley, who said, I used to work at the US Department of Energy as an environmental engineer, which required me to explain technical matters in language that the average person could understand and appreciate. That is the weakest link in the whole decision-making process. But it is possible to explain complex concepts in understandable language. It just takes effort. And then he signed off Stephen Buckley with his phone number, which I'm not going to read out loud into the record, but I will give to the council.
Thank you, Kessel. We have one more comment or question in person. It's okay. That's why we came to Holyoke.
Thank you very much for coming. Nathan Chung, Ward 5 in Holyoke. I think just one concern I want to raise is, similar to how producing electric vehicles and batteries, the process has a lot of pollution and a lot of mining impacts on the environment. So I guess the same concern could be raised about this type of technology, the mining impact to the environment, and the energy and the carbon and pollutants generated during the manufacturing of the infrastructure. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And I imagine there's no more.
We have somebody with their hand raised.
Okay. That's okay.
Let me.
Sorry, or do we have an concern around interpreters popping off at a certain time?
Yes, I gave them until 8:30.
Okay.
So we should be okay,
Okay.
but
Thank you. So we'll take that.
all
question
right.
from-
Stephen Buckley, you should be able to unmute yourself now.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Thank you. Yes, as you heard, I left a comment which was read out loud, and I appreciate that. And I appreciate the whole effort you're making to reach out and hear. Have to say, I just wanted to reiterate that it is possible to explain things in a way that's understandable and maybe even entertaining. Because if you can make something entertaining, then you're certainly engaging people. So anyway, I just wanted to emphasize, as some of your board members have said, that they're not technical, but they don't understand things. And if your board members don't understand, then that might be a sounding board for you all to say, how can we make this more understandable, more engaging? And one other way would be to say is if you can't explain it in a way, if it can't be explained to your family members, that was always the rule of thumb that I used. If I couldn't explain it to my family members in a way that was interesting, then it needed to I needed to do a better job. So that's one thing I just want to pass on. Thank you very much for the time tonight.
Thank you so much. And with that, I think we will, first of all, thank you so much to David and his team and Joanna for joining us virtually, and other folks from the Department of Energy Resources who also joined us and who have been working with your team on this. Our next meeting is on July 11th. So our sort of schedule is every 2 months. On the second Thursday of the month. So that falls on July 11th, and it will be in Lynn. So for folks in the public, that's not just a reminder to our council members that that's where we'll be in July. And with that, I will ask for a motion to close, to adjourn.
Can I ask a question before we
Sure.
close to adjourn?
No adjournment. It's okay.
In the past couple of meetings, we have talked about, or the question has been raised around working groups of this council, because part of the challenge that we face, like everyone else, is when we have these meetings, there's only a certain amount of time for generative, deep discussion about particular topics. And basically just that there's a value to having working groups for council members to be able to better understand particular issues that are going to be coming before the council, and to discuss other things that can make this process better, more inclusive, efficient, etc. So just wondering where we are at on that.
So we have not been able to have or to meet, I guess, in between EJ council meetings. We want to make sure that we're abiding by open meeting law, and that anytime the council meets, it is sort of open to the public, and that there's public notice and language access to the meetings of the council. So I have, I've reached out to our general counsel's office and sort of talking through what are the different options to do some of that work in between the every 2 months meetings. And so I guess I can provide maybe an update in July on where we're at in terms of the recommendation or how we can get work done in between the 2 months.
Yeah, I mean, obviously I'm just speaking for myself, but I do know that there are other state councils that have a working group structure. So I'm just curious about how those have been able to happen. And I don't know, is there a need for additional conversation with whoever is deciding that to better explain to council members about what the restrictions are and what the possibilities are? Because I think it's just having an impact on the progress of the work that we have been charged to do.
Yeah, absolutely. Before I joined the administration, I believe members from our general counsel's office, from our legal team, came to the council to talk a little bit about that, but I think it's probably a good idea to do that again in terms of what are the barriers to doing work in between meetings and who's allowed to do it and who's not and why is that the case. So that's definitely a request I can take back and have folks come and sort of explain the legal sort of requirements and procedures for the council.
Great. Thank you.
And I'm sorry, I keep like giving you.
It's okay,
the
it's
whole
okay.
time. So can I get a motion to adjourn?
I move to adjourn.
Second,
Second.
and we're adjourned. Thanks, everyone. Bye, everyone. Thanks for coming virtually and in person.
Peace, Cananamo.